Thanks everyone for being here. So I don't know what happens in your parishes, but sometimes in my parish, when there's a new antiphon or a new response or something like that, where you're asked to practice it before the liturgy begins. So my talk tonight is going to have a bit of a liturgical bent. You'll learn that very quickly. But I have one of these sort of little antiphons that we need to practice. And so I will periodically throughout the talk, hopefully in a fitting manner, in places that where I should do this, I will say Christos anesti, which means Christ is risen. So this is part of the Easter season, right? Christ is risen. And then everyone else should say alethos anesti. So I say Christos anesti, and you say alethos anesti. All right, great. Okay, friends. So now I can start. Ready? I would like to suggest tonight with this little lecture that the reality of liturgical time, right, so that's why we're going to have our antiphon here, is the proper lens for reading The Magician's Nephew, especially during Easter. And to open this idea, I would like us to take a look at a clip from The Good Place. Anyone a fan of The Good Place? All right, so this is from an episode called Jeremy Bear Me, where they're talking about what time looks like in the afterlife. Okay, so this is Janet, who you see on the screen now. And then, well, you don't need to know the characters.
So, all the attempts you made to torture us, we must have been in the afterlife for 100 years.
Almost 300, actually.
Well, how is it possible that all these things happened to us, but no time passed on Earth? Did you go back in time to save us?
I didn't have to, because of Jeremy Bear Me.
Who's Jeremy Bear Me?
Okay. Things in the afterlife don't happen while things are happening here. Because while time on Earth moves in a straight line, one thing happens, then the next, then the next. Time in the afterlife moves in a Jeremy Bear Me.
What?
In the afterlife, time doubles back and loops around and ends up looking something like Jeremy Bear Me. This is the timeline in the afterlife. Happens to kind of look like the name Jeremy Bear Me in cursive English, so that's what we call it.
Sorry, my brain is melting. How can events happen before the ones that happened before?
Just the way it works. It's Jeremy Bear Me. I don't know what to tell you. That's the easiest way to describe it.
Okay, but, what the hell is this? The dot over the I. The hell is that? Okay.
How do I explain this concisely? This is Tuesdays, and also July.
And sometimes it's never.
That's true. Occasionally, that moment on the Bear Me timeline is the time moment when nothing never occurs. So, you get it.
This broke me. The dot over the I. That broke me. I'm done.
You know what? I'm glad.
All right, friends. So liturgical time is not quite like this description of time in the afterlife. But I thought it would be interesting, at least, to open our minds to realizing that time is not exact. I mean, it's linear, right? But when we think liturgically, it's linear and it's something else. So we're going to think about that something else as we get going on our talk about The Magician's Nephew, okay? So thinking about time liturgically should not break us, nor should it make our minds melt. It does not bend back upon itself, taking us to times before times, or to a perpetual July, or to a never. Rather, it circles round rhythmically, bringing us ever deeper into the mysteries of Christ, which the circling round celebrates each day, each week, and each year. What's more, as David Fagerberg once put it, the events of the liturgical year happen again in the heart of each liturgical participant in the mystical body of Christ. This is the liturgical time of the Church. Thus, thinking about time liturgically means we are thinking about history as salvific, and knowing that this salvific history is ours. Understood in this way, time unfolds according to the interplay of God's call and our free responses. Time allows for us to hear God calling. Time, then, allows for us to respond, building, even if only little by little, a self and a life that can reflect God's word. This creative dialogue of call and response is what Genesis 1:27 calls dominion. we might more readily think of this as conversion. This cosmic, historic, and personal understanding of time is celebrated during the Easter Triduum in a special way. We have walked slowly with Christ through the historical moments of his passion, his death, and his resurrection, so as to experience that passion, death, and resurrection in our own hearts, wedding ourselves to this history and receiving its transcendent and salvific effects. Christos Anesti!
Alethos Anesti!
This is the Orthodox Easter greeting. Christos Anesti, Alethos Anesti. Replacing hello during the Easter season. In it, I hear a mind-meltingly beautiful testimony to the slow, intentional, and liturgical remembrance of Christ's historical and transcendent sacrifice during Holy Week. With these words, the speaker declares Christ's resurrection as if it had just happened 2 days ago, or 2 hours ago, or just now. We are speaking liturgically. But also imagine how declaring and hearing this for 50 days could affect our worldview. Wouldn't it become illuminated by the particular joy of Easter? The particular joy of being worthy of God's friendship and worth his divine blood? Wouldn't we feel challenged to become good and worthy signs ourselves of a reality constituted by divine friendship? We would be called to respond with dominion. Alethos, Anesti, truly, he is risen. In Christianity, writes Pope St. John Paul II, time has a fundamental importance. Within the dimension of time, the world was created. Within it, the history of salvation unfolds, finding its culmination in the fullness of time of the Incarnation. In Jesus Christ, the Word made flesh, time becomes a dimension of God, who is himself eternal. Now that last little bit about time becoming a dimension of God might melt your brain, but that is of no matter. God is beyond the human mind. It's no matter so long as it melts our pride in thinking of the great humility of God and what it expresses of God's love for us. To turn closer to our topic for this evening, C.S. Lewis says as much about his own conversion in his autobiography, Surprised by Joy. Quote, "You must picture me alone in that room in Magdalen, night after night, feeling, whenever my mind lifted, even for a second from my work, the steady, unrelenting approach of him whom I so earnestly desired not to meet. That which I greatly feared had at last come upon me. In the Trinity term of 1929, I gave in and admitted that God was God, and knelt and prayed. Perhaps that night the most dejected and reluctant convert in all England. I did not then see what is now the most shining and obvious thing, the divine humility which will accept a convert even on such terms. The prodigal son at least walked home on his own feet, but who can duly adore that love which will open the high gates to a prodigal son who is brought in kicking, struggling, resentful, and darting his eyes in every direction for a chance of escape." End quote. Though bereft of alleluias, this is the liturgical and transcendent Easter moment. God approached Lewis and descended into his struggle, into his resentment and his reluctance. God entered the tomb of Lewis's heart and brought eternal joy into it. Yet conversion was not an emotional experience for C.S. Lewis. Indeed, emotional, he writes, is perhaps the last word we can apply to some of the most important events. It was more like when a man, after a long sleep, still lying motionless in bed, becomes aware that he is now awake. Awake, Lewis was able to look about himself and see Christ in the other world of God's kingdom. He is able to look back through his own history, through his memory, and discern God's unrelenting approach. In this kingdom, as we often hear in the Chronicles of Narnia, time is different. It is liturgical. And as Psalm 90 tells us, 1,000 years is but a day for God. Still, time allows God to approach and to call, and time allows for the slow, circling process of seeking revelation and of conversion. Time is the process of taking up dominion over our own journey to sainthood, of conforming to the Word incarnate and crucified, humble and loving. This circling process of confirmation has a particular name within Catholicism. We call it mystagogy. Most properly, it is the catechetical season that begins with the conclusion of the Easter Triduum. It is the season of seeking to understand ever more fully the mystery of God's love for us as expressed and experienced in the liturgy and the sacraments, both remembrances and representations of Christ's sacrifice of love. And so we finally arrive at my first point, which will allow us to turn in a moment to actually treating the story told in The Magician's Nephew. So what is my first point? Understanding the concept of liturgical time allows us to read The Magician's Nephew as a particularly mystagogical text. The sixth book published in the Chronicles of Narnia, The Magician's Nephew is a window into the mystery of Narnia's creation and the origins of that sacramental wardrobe that first opened our world unto that other world of Narnia in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. In other words, we have already crossed into Narnia with C.S. Lewis, into a world that deepened our understanding of God's time and God's kingdom. That story was something like Easter. Now, with The Magician's Nephew, C.S. Lewis will lead us into a mystagogical catechesis by connecting Easter with what Genesis calls the beginning, but which we will treat more broadly as the mystery of creation, extending beyond the beginning to our ongoing conversion today. In order to follow Lewis best, I would like first to draw out the connections between the story of creation in The Magician's Nephew and the Easter liturgy. This will help us see the mystagogical movement of The Magician's Nephew better, and therefore help us enter more deeply into the mystery of our own creation and conversion. The end result, I hope, will be a call to the challenge of sainthood, of, that is, becoming more like God by extending God's dominion of love. We have been called since the beginning to such a response. Shall we let The Magician's Nephew inspire us to become saints this Easter Tuesday? Shall we hear in it a way not simply to imagine sainthood, but to know it is a reality, and to respond with cosmic effect? Christos Anesti! The first reading we hear at the Easter Vigil comes from the first creation account in Genesis. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, etc. We could offer much beautiful commentary on Genesis 1, as my students know who are here tonight, which we cannot offer tonight, but we should at least start with what Genesis teaches above all. The first creation account impresses the mystery of creation upon its listeners. Genesis 1 teaches us to think of creation as a mystery from the very narration of the account. As we listen, the narrative is presented from the perspective of someone watching and listening as God creates. First this, then this. Yet it is not until the sixth day of creation that anyone who could have watched or listened or therefore narrated and written this account was created. In other words, creation, in its beginning, went unobserved and was, in fact, unobservable. This then points to the mystery of creation, an activity and a subject that arose from the very heart of the Creator. The creation as a mystery is corroborated by other readings from the Easter Vigil, most notably that from Baruch and Isaiah 55. Baruch reads, "The one who sends forth the light and it goes, he called it and it obeyed him, trembling. The stars shone in their watches and were glad. He called them and they said, here we are. They shone with gladness for him who made them." And Isaiah 55 verses 10 and 11 tells us about God's creative word. "As the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it." Thus, Baruch and Isaiah both tell us again that God created by speaking, developing images with call and response. In the beginning, God spoke all things into existence, calling them with his eternal word, "Let there be." And what is even more beautiful about this mystery of creation is that because the word is eternal, God is still calling each of us into existence, calling us to become who we are in God's image and likeness, calling us to dominion. And so the mystery of creation is not simply an unobservable event from the beginning of time, but the ongoing conversion of creation to the love that first moved God to speak. In the passage from Baruch, we also hear the stars as they respond to God, so glad in their new existence. This same idea of creation responding to the Creator's word can be found in the original Hebrew of Genesis. When God called to the earth to produce vegetation, the grass grassed. Like the stars and the grass of Genesis, we are meant to respond to God who calls us to life. But we are the only creatures in Genesis who are like God, made in God's image, and given dominion over the rest of creation. C.S. Lewis, through the use of Genesis in The Magician's Nephew, shows us what it could look like to listen to God and to respond with dominion. It looks like being converted to the love God speaks in his word. This human response to God that images God's good dominion is not an easy response. It is not like the grass grassing or the stars shining. It will require the ongoing growth of the human being to become more and more like God by loving well. It requires conversion. This can truly only happen if we are willing to listen and to respond to the ways in which God speaks. Listen to me, says God in Isaiah 55, another Easter liturgy reading. Give ear and come to me. God has spoken to creation throughout history. Augustine tells us that God never spoke so eloquently as he did upon the cross with his blood. This blood testified to the love of the Creator, spoken now in the sacrificial act of an I love you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Thus, Genesis 1 finds its place in the Easter liturgy, pointing us not only back to the beginning, but to the beginning that today can be, as we listen to our Creator and his blood speaking to us of love. Easter is about the creative and transformative power of this love, a force, as Pope Benedict XVI tells us, that is greater than the biological and so stronger than death. The liturgy of the Easter Vigil is shot through with this reality. Aslan's blood does not speak to us directly until the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when he gives his life in place of Edmund. Yet we can hear the sacrificial fullness of the creation account in The Magician's Nephew too. We hear this in one brief sentence in chapter 10. There Aslan tells all the newly created talking creatures of Narnia, I give you yourselves, and I give you myself. These are some of the first words to the Narnians, and they summarize salvation history, even though it is yet to unfold in Narnia from the beginning to Easter Sunday into every individual moment of becoming and conversion in the spiritual journey of each creature. Perhaps we can hear it this way because our first experience was to come to Narnia through the wardrobe, long after Narnia's beginning. Yes, we are moving mystagogically. It seems to me then that Aslan's gift of self, both of ourselves in dominion and of himself to us, is a way of understanding the gift of dominion in the first creation story. It is a way of entering more deeply into the mystery of creation as explained by the Easter mysteries of God's death and resurrection. Christos Anesti. All right, let us now turn to learn more through Narnia's Genesis. Notice I'm skipping all of the stuff that happens in Charm, just jumping right to the creation story. All right. As with the accounts in Genesis, the reader is invited to envision the act of creation in The Magician's Nephew. Here, though, we are helped with this vision more than in Genesis because we have the reactions of those truly observing Aslan's creative work to assist our imagination. My edition also has illustrations. This does not mean that creation is any less of a mystery, just that our imaginations are invited to explore it more deeply. We will recount now some of the acts of creation in The Magician's Nephew and then look at the responses of some of the characters watching Aslan create, namely the cabbie, Uncle Andrew, and Diggory. This will deepen our understanding of the mystery of creation mystagogically, as suggested earlier, and open the horizons of the dominion of sainthood. Similar to God speaking in Genesis, Aslan sings all of Narnia into existence. The sons of Adam, who have coincidentally arrived in Narnia at just this moment, watch and listen. In the darkness of Narnia before its beginning, Uncle Andrew, the cabbie, Polly, and Diggory all hear Aslan singing, aware of the song before becoming aware of its effect. Quote, a voice had begun to sing. It was very far away, and Diggory found it hard to decide from what direction it was coming. It was, beyond comparison, the most beautiful noise he had ever heard. It was so beautiful he could hardly bear it. Then two wonders happened at the same moment. One was that the voice was suddenly joined by other voices, more voices than you could possibly count. They were in harmony with it, but far higher up the scale, cold, tingling, silvery voices. The second was that the blackness overhead all at once was blazing with stars. It was the stars themselves that were singing, and it was the first voice, which had made them appear and made them sing. End quote. How well we also hear the voice of Baruch now. Presently, we would also hear Aslan creating the sun. The eastern sky changed from white to pink, and from pink to gold. The voice rose and rose, till all the air was shaking with it, and just as it swelled to the mightiest and most glorious sound that had yet produced, the sun rose. Music, says C.S. Lewis, is the highest of the arts. Music fills the space around us with beauty and with the expressions of pure feeling. Picking up, Lewis also says, where the other arts leave off. And now Narnia, in this creative moment, is filled with the beauty and expression of song and the purest of light, golden and glorious. The closest my imagination brings me to this moment is the memory of a spectacular fireworks show, put to music on a late summer's night in my backyard. Explosions of color and sound all around me. Even this, though, is too mundane and unmagical. Polly's observations are more helpful than my memories in drawing out the connection between this song and the creative activity witnessed as the skies and the earth erupted with light and life. Quote, when the lion burst into a rapid series of lighter notes, Polly was not surprised to see primroses suddenly appearing in every direction. Thus, with an unspeakable thrill, she felt quite certain that all the things were coming, as she said, out of the lion's head. When you listened to the lion's song, you heard the things he was making up. When you looked around, you saw them. Aslan is truly thinking and singing Narnia into existence, freely loving it into existence, beautiful and luminous through his song. Don't you wish you had been there in the beginning of Narnia to hear the stars singing and to witness the first sunrise? I do. Perhaps this account of creation gives you a fresh take on God separating the light from the darkness in Genesis 1 by saying, let there be light. Genesis' description of what followed upon this statement goes something like this, and it was so. While majestic and solemn, it is not quite so stunning as Narnia's illumination, opening our minds to the goodness of creation through its beauty. We are also reminded by Lewis that Scripture's particular cosmology and its beauty are meant to direct us toward God. As Leon Cass, a bioethicist, puts it, heaven and its occupants are not eternal. They come into being. There is something temporally before, causally behind, and ontologically above the cosmos. Heaven, the enduring vault of the cosmos, the stunning star-studded sphere that ceaselessly circles above, into which ancient people looked with awe and fear, wonder and admiration, is, according to the Bible, not deserving of such respect. But God is, and as God tells us with God's own blood, we are too. Thus, we are capable of thinking along the contours of God's creative thought, and to sing, as it were, the song of love, conformed thereby to its creative activity and reality. We join in this song by listening and responding, becoming witnesses to the unobservable mystery of the God who is love. Christos Anesti. All right, let us look now at the responses to Aslan's creative song given by the cabbie Uncle Andrew of Diggory. So watching and listening, take one, the cabbie. The example of the cabbie's response to Aslan's song is the most simple. It is a snapshot of what the right response to God makes of a person. It is, in other words, the simplest picture of dominion. The cabbie watches and listens with shining eyes, open mouth, drinking in the sound. His response could be summarized in the cabbie's first words as he sees the blackness of the night sky become the blazing realm of sing-song stars. Glory be. Put in more words, the response of the cabbie is one of awe and gratitude. He watches and listens, fully aware of the love that is thinking such beauty into existence right before his eyes. With the cabbie, though, we would equally be satisfied with the more terse words of Genesis, and it was so. Like a firework exploding in the night sky, simplicity of his response allows us to more easily see the transformative power of responding with thanksgiving to God's creative work. The response of gratitude is the one response that allows our dominion to be exercised, a dominion that has first and foremost to do with our own creation and conversion. The Cabby is simply and purely doxological. And so he becomes, in response to Aslan, and in the utterance of a glory be, King Frank of Narnia. All the sharpness and cunning and quarrelsomeness which he had picked up as a London cabby seemed to have been washed away, and the courage and the kindness which he had always had were easier to see. Perhaps it was the air of the young world that had done it, or talking with Aslan, or both. Even his horse, now the talking and flying Fledge, can recognize the noble change. "Upon my word," whispered Fledge to Polly, "my old master's been changed nearly as much as I have. Why, he's a real master now." He is, we might add to Fledge's description, become saintly per the book of Revelation, washed, robed, crowned, a truly living creature, giving glory and thanks and honor. Frank the Cabby is now a king. He has been given the gift of dominion. And how did all of this come about? As C.S. Lewis shows, simply by talking with Aslan. By, that is, entering into the dialogue of creation that includes the many ways we are truly converted into masters of our own selves, exercising dominion over our own transformation as saints, or in one word, loving. With this simple and shining example of response and dominion, we can look now at Andrew and Diggory as contrast and what I'm calling complexification. So watching and not listening, take 2, Uncle Andrew. Throughout the creation of Narnia, Uncle Andrew is told again and again by the cabby to essentially give ear and come. These are the words from Isaiah, yes, but the cabby expresses them as he tells Uncle Andrew time and again to stow it, because watching and listening is the thing now. But Uncle Andrew is unwilling to do so. Quite unlike the cabby, Uncle Andrew does not exercise dominion over himself, and so we cannot see the creative activity around him for what it is, an expression of love, poured out in the creative act and upon that new creation. Uncle Andrew isn't interested in the magic of loving. He is only interested in being a magician himself, of exercising some other self-loving power. As he watches Aslan sing, Uncle Andrew's mouth was open, like the cabby's, but not open with joy, not to drink in its almost unbearable beauty. Rather, Uncle Andrew looked more as if his chin had simply dropped away from the rest of his face. His shoulders were stooped, and his knees shook. He was not liking the voice. If he could have got away from it by creeping into a rat's hole, he would have done so. C.S. Lewis's description of Uncle Andrew is really quite comical. How ridiculous Uncle Andrew seems as we read along. But perhaps this comic relief gives agency to Lewis's example of Uncle Andrew. For we are all like Uncle Andrew sometimes. And isn't it easier to hear this with some levity and some laughter? Don't we need to be able to laugh at how seriously we take ourselves? More deserving of respect and attention, we think, certainly than the sun and the stars, but even more so than God himself. The reality of dominion, in other words, allows for the reality of sin, for not wanting very much to hear the voice speaking to us, reluctant and dejected. And sometimes we can only become willing to do so from a rat's hole. There are 2 especially comic ways we see the story of Uncle Andrew and his not dominion unfold. First, we watch as he wishes to exercise dominion over Narnia, but for his own personal gain, as if the whole new world had just been created for his own use. I, he says, have discovered a world where everything is bursting with life and growth. Columbus now, they talk about Columbus. But what was America to this? The commercial possibilities of this country are unbounded. Bring a few old bits of scrap iron here, bury them, and up they come as brand new railway engines, battleships, anything you please. They'll cost nothing, and I can sell them at full prices in England. I shall be a millionaire. And the climate. I feel years younger already. I can run it as a health resort. A good sanatorium here might be worth $20,000 a year. Of course, I shall have to let a few people into the secret. The first thing is to get that brute shot. In short, Uncle Andrew would like to kill Aslan, that brute, and thereby replace God with himself. And it will seemingly cost Andrew nothing. This is the classic definition of sin in its very origin. It is the opposite of gratitude, and it is to see the world through holy me-colored glasses. Glory be to me! Andrew exercises no Aslan-like dominion over himself, unwilling to even pay the price of seeing anything worthy of love and attention beyond himself. Not even, we are told, the sad nephew Diggory, nor Diggory's dying mother, who is his own sister. In fact, Andrew only participates in becoming less himself, ceding the dominion of love to selfish pride. This brings us to Lewis's second comical picture of Uncle Andrew. The talking animals of the new Narnia make Uncle Andrew into their pet. This great magician, capable, he thinks, of becoming a godlike, magical, and ingenious millionaire, has been reduced to an incomprehensible beast. The Narnian animals, writes Lewis, were really getting quite fond of their strange pet, and hoped that Aslan would allow them to keep it. The cleverer ones were quite sure by now that at least some of the noises which came out of his mouth had a meaning. They christened him Brandy, because he made that noise so often. Remember, he's always wanting to drink of brandy. Perhaps the only thing more ridiculous than this picture of Uncle Andrew is how Uncle Andrew himself perceives the creative activity happening around him. His thoughts are in contrast to Aslan's, centered on Andrew rather than the creation of another, and on use rather than glory and thanksgiving, as we saw before. Andrew is not being transformed into a master, but into a dumb beast. He is refusing the dominion of love. Here, C.S. Lewis gives us an ear into another unobservable phenomenon, the uncreation of Andrew, as he refuses to respond or even to hear Aslan's song. Listen to Andrew's thoughts and Lewis's comment upon them. Quote, "Of course, it can't really have been singing," he thought. "I must have imagined it. I've been letting my nerves get out of order. Who ever heard of a lion singing?" And the longer and more beautiful the lion sang, the harder Uncle Andrew tried to make himself believe that he could hear nothing but roaring. Now, the trouble about trying to make yourself stupider than you really are is that you very often succeed. Uncle Andrew did. He soon did hear nothing but roaring in Aslan's song. Soon he couldn't have heard anything else if he wanted to. And when at last the lion spoke and said, "Narnia, awake!" he didn't hear any words. He heard only a snarl. And when the beast spoke in answer, he heard only barkings, growlings, bayings, and howlings. And when they laughed, well, you can imagine. That was the worst for Uncle Andrew. That was worse than anything that had happened yet. Such a horrid, bloodthirsty din of hungry and angry brutes he had never heard in his life. Reluctant to see reality for what it is, Uncle Andrew is certainly unable to imagine real dominion of love and aspire to sainthood. In 3 further telling lines, Aslan reveals Andrew's downfall. "He has made himself unable to hear my voice. If I spoke to him, he would hear only growlings and roarings. O Adam's sons, how cleverly you defend yourselves against all that might do you good." And since we need levity when we're talking about all this, I'll have this nice Far Side cartoon for you. And please, God, let Mom, Dad, Rex, Tucker, and me see in color. All right. Watching and listening, take 3, Diggory. So finally, we arrive at the example of Diggory. Diggory's response is more complex than the cabbie and opposite Uncle Andrew's. Diggory reveals to us the transformative process of coming into true dominion and journeying toward sainthood. His response encompasses his decision to speak to Aslan, his journey to retrieve the apple, his struggle to withstand the temptation to take this apple home for his dying mother, and so to bring it in sacrifice and thanksgiving to Aslan instead. C.S. Lewis's narrative of Diggory's transformation, then, provides us with the images, imagination, and the courage to understand that becoming a saint is a very real possibility for each of us. We need only exercise the dominion of love day by day, week by week, year by year. There is an element of the autobiographical in Diggory's story, and this makes sense, since learning with Diggory about the dominion of love includes observing the unobservable creative work of conversion. Diggory, I think, is not unlike C.S. Lewis. Diggory's story carries particular marks of Lewis's own conversion, from the death of his mother when a young boy to the surprise, as Lewis called it, of real joy, mentioned earlier. With our Lewis-like Diggory, then, we enter into the heart of the text's mystagogical catechesis. We encounter, I think, Lewis's backward-looking view of God's slow approach and final descent into the heart. With Diggory, we will encounter the idea of dominion as becoming personally conformed to God's love through sacrifice. This is, quote, the mature fruit of mystagogy, writes Benedict XVI. And it requires, quote, an awareness that one's life is progressively being transformed according to and in the celebration of God's sacrificial love, not only at Easter, but each and every Sunday. I think I put my son to sleep. All right. As a new creation, Diggory and anyone so conformed becomes capable of responding in ways that bear witness to God's love and so participate in God's ongoing creative work. We exercise our true dominion, perhaps even becoming saints, through the creative work of conversion. Now, Diggory, as you know, is focused on his mother's illness for much of The Magician's Nephew. He is crying as the story begins, grubby and tearful. Watching and listening as Aslan creates, the sad Diggory is introduced to joy. You could imagine, watching with Diggory, that the sun had laughed for joy as it came up, and that's a quote, responding as it was to Aslan's mightiest and most glorious sound yet. Perhaps we could say that Diggory is attracted to this joy, awed by this joy. He follows Aslan, unable to take his eyes off the ever more golden lion, as he creates the animals of Narnia, each rising out of the sea of grass, already grassed and flowered and treed. Only after all this does Aslan's song fall silent, and he stops to gaze upon the beasts, breathing a long, warm breath upon them and making them talking beasts. Here are Aslan's first words to his new creation. Narnia, Narnia, Narnia. Awake, love, think, speak. We seem to see Diggory also awaken in the following moments to love and thought and dialogue. He awakens to the joy and to the love that has just constituted before his own eyes everything around him. Eventually, he will offer a sacrifice and a thanksgiving. His encounter with Aslan will make him ready to think and act or speak according to the logic of love. So let us listen now to the scene in which Diggory first talks with Aslan, a plea on behalf of his mother bursting forth from his sorrows, as Aslan gives him the task of undoing his wrong, the whole party skipped. In this encounter and conversation, the despairing Diggory will be greatly surprised. Quote, but please, please, can't you give me something that will cure my mother? Up till then, he had been looking at the lion's great feet and huge claws. Now, in his despair, he looked up at its face. What he saw surprised him as much as anything in his whole life, for the tawny face was bent down near his own, and, wonder of wonders, great shining tears stood in the lion's eyes. They were such big, bright tears compared with Diggory's own, that for a moment he felt as if the lion must really be sorrier about his mother than he was himself. Aslan, with an absolutely pure grief, uncolored by any selfishness, even the desire for a mother, has entered into Diggory's despair. My son, said Aslan, I know, grief is great. Only you and I in this land know that yet. Let us be good to one another. But I have to think of hundreds of years in the life of Narnia. The witch whom you have brought into this world will come back to Narnia again. But it need not be yet. It is my wish to plant in Narnia a tree that she will not dare to approach, and that tree will protect Narnia from her for many years. You must get me the seed from which that tree is to grow. Yes, sir, said Diggory. And Lewis adds, he didn't quite know how it was to be done, but he felt quite sure now that he would be able to do it. The lion drew a deep breath, stooped its head even lower, and gave him a lion's kiss. And at once Diggory felt that new strength and courage had gone into him. In this encounter with Aslan, we have just seen Diggory become hopeful and to entrust himself to the lion, receiving his love. These three, faith, hope, and love,
provide the strength and courage Diggory needs to exercise a dominion over himself, whose law and spirit is love, and whose actions then are sacrificial. With such a dominion over one's thoughts and words, one could become heroically loving, one could become a saint. Thus, encouraged and sustained by this memory of Aslan, Diggory is sent on a journey across Narnia to retrieve the silver apple. Along the way, Diggory is further strengthened by the beauty and goodness of the newly created Narnia all around him. All of this, too, could speak to him of Aslan's joys and tears. He saw great barrier cliffs that rose before them with dazzling effect. As the sunlight danced on the great waterfall roaring below, he and Polly witnessed Narnia's first sunset, in which the sun sank lower and lower till the western sky was all like one great furnace of melted gold. They bathed in a mountain river, running in shallow cataracts over red and blue and yellow stones with the sun on it. And finally they smelled a heavenly smell, warm and golden, as if from all the most delicious fruits and flowers of the world. This aroma signaled their arrival in the valley with the lake in it and the garden with the silver apples. Here Diggory will be tempted. His love for Aslan will be tested. Indeed, the whole dominion of love will be doubted. Through his temptation, we learn whether Diggory will rule over himself with the dominion of love, ordering his desires, his words, and his actions accordingly, even sacrificially. So let us eavesdrop on this conversation with the witch outside the garden's gates. Notice how the witch tempts Diggory to doubt the reality and the logic of love. Do you know what this fruit is? I will tell you. It is the apple of youth, the apple of life. I know, for I have tasted it, and I feel already such changes in myself that I know I shall never grow old or die. Eat it, boy, eat it, and you and I will both live forever and be king and queen of this whole world, or of your world, if you decide to go back there. No thanks, said Diggory. I don't know that I care much about living on and on after everyone I know is dead. I'd rather live in ordinary time and die and go to heaven. But what about this mother of yours whom you pretend to love so? What's she got to do with it? Said Diggory. Do you not see, fool, that one bite of that apple would heal her? You have it in your pocket. We are here by ourselves and the lion is far away. Use your magic and go back to your own world. A minute later, you can be at your mother's bedside. Give her the fruit. 5 minutes later, you will see the color coming back to her face. She will tell you the pain is gone. Soon she will tell you she is feeling stronger. Then she will fall asleep. Think of that. Hours of sweet, natural sleep, without pain, without drugs. Next day, everyone will be saying how wonderfully she has recovered. Soon she will be quite well again. All will be well again. Your home will be happy again. You will be like other boys. Oh, gasped Diggory, as if he had been hurt, and he put his hand to his head, for he now knew that the most terrible choice lay before him. The witch continues, What has the lion ever done for you that you should be his slave? What would he do to you once you are back in your own world? And what would your mother think if she knew that you could have taken her pain away and given her back her life and saved your father's heart from being broken? And that you wouldn't, that you'd rather run messages for a wild animal in a strange world that is no business of yours. I don't think he is a wild animal, said Diggory in a dried up sort of voice. He is, I don't know. Then he is something worse, said the witch. Look what he has done to you already. Look how heartless he has made you. That is what he does to everyone who listens to him, cruel, pitiless boy. But of course it is the witch who is cruel and pitiless. She tempts Diggory with his love for his mother and with his own despair. He must resist the witch's temptations to cease to trust in Aslan and to forget the love expressed in his bright, big tears and his songs of joy. Diggory's love for his mother is truly but a sign and a reference point to divine love, to that love which truly mothers us. In this moment, Diggory is also free. He has the dominion to think and speak and love according to this larger love. Two quotes from C.S. Lewis's The Four Loves explain just this point. We may give our human loves the unconditional allegiance which we owe only to God. Then they become God's. Then they become demons or witches. Then they will destroy or uncreate us. Lewis perhaps learned this from Augustine, whom he cites elsewhere in the Four Loves. In words which can still bring tears to the eyes, St. Augustine describes the desolation into which the death of his friend Nebridius plunged him. This is in Confessions 4, if anyone wants to read it. Then he draws a moral. This is what comes, he says, of giving one's heart to anything but God. All human beings pass away. Do not let your happiness depend on something you may lose. If love is to be a blessing, not a misery, it must be for the only beloved who will never pass away. Turning to listen and respond to the witch rather than Aslan would only bring Diggory greater misery and despair. It would cause him to cling to a love that is not eternal, that is not joyful, that cannot truly and purely commiserate with him in his sorrow, or fear, or loneliness. A love that cannot bring an Easter morning into the heart. Such a love would cause Diggory to be less than himself, a shadow of the real Diggory, who was created by love, willing to be deeply sorrowful over him and with him. The only real sadness in life, says Leon Bloy, is not to become a saint. Part of Diggory's triumph in gaining full dominion over himself, then, arises from his constant memory of Aslan's tears. They don't only express sorrow, but love and the possibility of joy. They make him aware that if there is a love even greater than his mother's, then there is a greater sorrow too. That greater sorrow is to give ourselves over to the witch's miserable and counterfeit dominion. Lewis makes a not-so-veiled reference to this in the warning of the final chapter, saying our world will soon be ruled by tyrants, like Hitler, who care no more for joy or justice and mercy than the witch does. Our choices of love, each and every one of them, have the cosmic effect of creating through conversion. Love, as Dorothy Day once said, adding to the sum total of love in the world. Sorrow, as a symptom of love, can have a good cosmic effect too. Paschal sorrow erupts into Easter joy. Still, having freely chosen to take the silver apple back to Aslan, Diggory never spoke on the way back, and the others were shy of speaking to him. He was very sad, and he wasn't even sure all the time that he had done the right thing. But whenever he remembered the shining tears in Aslan's eyes, he became sure. Beautiful as it is in Lewis's telling, we don't have time to attend to the miraculous healing of the Diggory's mother, but in some ways, that is of little matter. What is of most importance, I think, is to recognize here the mystagogical process of entering fully into the dominion of love, and so into sainthood. Diggory expresses it well as his hope and his capacity for sacrificial love rely upon his memories of encountering Aslan. Mystagogy leads to the dominion of sainthood because it involves the ability to hope precisely by remembering, every day and every week and every year, the love of God in its concrete historical expressions in the mysteries of Christ and of Christ's body in the saints. Even once Diggory returned home, even once his mother had eaten the apple and slept peacefully and awoke strengthened, Diggory had to return his mind to his encounter with Aslan. For the rest of that day, whenever he looked at the things about him and saw how ordinary and unmagical they were, he hardly dared to hope. But when he remembered the face of Aslan, he did hope. Recalling thus, the mysteries of his own encounter with Aslan, and so the mysteries of his creation and conversion, Diggory is not only hopeful, but joyful, awake to the other kingdom and conformed day by day, memory by memory, to its dominion of love. In conclusion, and happily for us, the liturgical year also remembers the saints in the ways they have each exercised the dominion of God's love. Truly, the whole liturgical year has a mystagogical element to it. Day by day, we see the unobservable, creative work of God become visible in the saints. And so, day by day, we are reminded of the cosmic effect of our choices of love. The saints of the liturgical calendar are named and celebrated as models for us all in this daily work of God's creation and our conversion. Models of heroic conformation to the mystery of God's love, whatever sacrifices this might ask of us. Thus, though the liturgical calendar invites us to remember and commemorate the saints, in so doing it also invites us to look into our own futures and courageously imagine and hope in what we might become if we faithfully rule ourselves according to the dominion of love. Christos anesti.
Christos anesti.